What if the royal family you thought you knew suddenly erased your favorite couple from history? That question has been burning in the minds of royal watchers, palace insiders, and millions of fans worldwide ever since whispers of Prince William's shocking decision began leaking through the corridors of Buckingham Palace. At 43, the heir apparent, Prince William, Duke of Cambridge, is reportedly taking a step so extreme, so irreversible, that it threatens to redefine the modern monarchy, a permanent stripping of Harry and Meghan's royal titles. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It sounds unthinkable, doesn't it? The Duke and Duchess of Sussex, once celebrated for their glamour, their popularity, their charitable endeavors, suddenly no longer royal, cut off from the institution they married into. And yet, sources insist this isn't a momentary show of anger. This is deliberate, calculated. A move that William has pushed through the royal council with precision, leaving even the closest advisors stunned. But why now? Why at this particular juncture in their tumultuous relationship? To understand, we need to rewind the clock, way back to a time when William and Harry were inseparable. Childhood photos show two brothers playing in the gardens of Kensington Palace, carefree laughter echoing against the stone walls. Friends recall their camaraderie, their fierce loyalty to each other, their shared love for Diana and her values. And yet, somewhere along the line, cracks began to form. Enter Meghan Markle, the American actress who captured Harry's heart with her charm, wit, and determination. At first, William reportedly welcomed Meghan, seeing her as a force that could help Harry find stability. But as time went on, things changed. Tensions grew behind palace walls. Meghan's influence, some insiders suggest, was more disruptive than supportive. And Harry, caught between loyalty to his wife and allegiance to his brother, found himself navigating treacherous waters. The public, of course, saw only a fraction of this. Glamorous weddings, viral smiles, red carpet appearances, nothing hinted at the brewing storm. But those within the palace, those who understand the intricate dance of monarchy and bloodline, knew something was amiss. Meetings were called. Conversations whispered in corridors. Royal aides scribbled notes in hushed tones. And William, the future king, began to see a threat, an existential threat not just to his family's legacy, but to the institution itself. Leaked documents, which have yet to be officially confirmed, suggest William first raised the idea of stripping titles quietly, almost as an afterthought. But the more he thought, the more convinced he became. The monarchy could not endure if Harry and Meghan continued on their independent path, flaunting their privileges while simultaneously rejecting the responsibilities that came with them. A bold move was required. And bold moves, as history has shown, rarely come without controversy. The timing of this decision is critical. In recent months, Harry and Meghan have been increasingly visible in media circles, interviews, public appearances, charitable engagements that often skirt the line between public service and personal branding. To William, these actions weren't just breaches of protocol. They were symbolic gestures, signaling a disconnect from the values he believes should underpin royalty. And while some may argue that stripping titles is an extreme measure, insiders insist that William sees it as a necessary one, a protective step to shield the monarchy from further scrutiny, scandal, and potential erosion of authority. Fans around the world are divided. Some cheer William's decisiveness, praising him for safeguarding the institution. Others express outrage, seeing this as fraternal betrayal on a scale almost Shakespearean in its drama. Social media is ablaze. Hashtags trend hourly, discussions rage in forums, and every major news outlet devotes coverage to the unfolding story. The world is watching, but few truly understand the full story behind closed palace doors. And this is where the curiosity gap comes in. Because what William revealed behind the velvet curtains, in rooms filled with advisors, aides, and senior royals, has left even those closest to him speechless. We know he pushed for a council vote. What we don't yet know is the reasoning that led him to insist on permanent removal. Was it personal, strategic, or a combination of both? What were the arguments presented, the emotional pleas, the threats, and the ultimatums exchanged in those tense hours? These are the questions we'll explore in the chapters ahead. Before we dive in, consider the stakes. This isn't just a story about family squabbles. It's a story about power, legacy, and the fragile balance between public duty and personal loyalty. Stripping Harry and Meghan of their titles doesn't just affect them. It ripples across the monarchy, influencing public opinion, international perception, and even the future line of succession. Every decision William makes now could shape the monarchy for generations. And yet, for all the drama and tension, there's an undercurrent of irony. The very institution William is trying to protect has always been built on appearances, tradition, and careful management of image. And here he is, taking an action so shocking that the world cannot look away. William's decisiveness may secure the monarchy, but it also risks alienating the very people whose admiration has sustained it, the public. So, as we begin this journey, ask yourself, what would you do if your brother's actions threatened the family legacy you've spent your life defending? Would you act decisively, coldly, strategically? Or would you find another path, one that protects family first? William's choice suggests he has made his decision, and there may be no turning back. But what happened next, in the hours following the council vote, is something that no one outside those palace walls expected. The shockwaves would be felt not only by Harry and Meghan, but by every member of the royal family, staff, and indeed the public who had invested so deeply in the Sussex story. And the truth about William's motivations, the private conversations, the leaked documents, the emotional confrontations, will reveal a side of the heir apparent that fans have never seen before. As we move into the next chapter, we'll uncover the first domino to fall in this unprecedented saga. The childhood bond between William and Harry, and how early events set the stage for a rift that would culminate in one of the most dramatic royal decisions of the 21st century. The stage is set. The players are ready. And the consequences of this decision will unfold in ways that no one, not even the royal family, can fully predict. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What begins as a whisper in the palace often ends as a headline that shocks the world. The story begins long before the council votes, the title removals, or the public outrage. It begins with two brothers, William and Harry, bound by blood, shaped by shared tragedy, and yet increasingly divided by circumstance, personality, and, yes, Meghan Markle. The tension we are about to explore didn't appear overnight. It was forged over years, shaped in moments both public and private, punctuated by heartbreak, rivalry, and relentless scrutiny. In their early years, William and Harry were inseparable. Friends remember them sneaking out of Kensington Palace, riding bikes through the gardens, and concocting secret adventures that seemed innocent at the time, but were early lessons in negotiation, strategy, and loyalty. Diana, ever watchful, encouraged their independence but instilled in them a fierce sense of responsibility. She warned them, repeatedly, that the world would judge them not by intentions but by appearances. Those words, however, would come to weigh differently on each brother. William, methodical and measured, internalized every caution. Harry, impulsive and rebellious, absorbed it differently, sometimes as a challenge, sometimes as a burden. Fast forward to their adult lives. The weight of expectation presses differently on each. William, heir to the throne, is meticulously groomed for leadership, every public appearance rehearsed, every decision calculated. Harry, though royal, lives under a different lens. One colored by rebellion, adventure, and the legacy of loss that shaped him profoundly. And then Meghan arrives. The dynamic shifts. At first, William reportedly welcomed Meghan warmly. He saw her as a stabilizing influence, someone who might help Harry channel his energy constructively. But the honeymoon phase didn't last long. Insiders claim Meghan's assertive personality and strategic approach to media engagement began to unsettle William. Meetings that were once collaborative became tense. Subtle disagreements over protocol escalated. The brothers' once ironclad bond began to crack. It wasn't just Meghan. The world around them, staff, advisors, media, amplified every perceived slight. A careless headline could turn a minor disagreement into a public spectacle. William, ever protective of the institution, began to worry not only about the personal implications but the broader consequences. If Harry and Meghan continue to operate outside the monarchy's norms, an insider reportedly told The Times, It threatens the very structure we've tried to uphold for generations. And here's where the story deepens. Harry and Meghan were not silent participants. Sources suggest they began coordinating their own media strategies, carefully curating appearances that highlighted independence, influence, and a sense of rebellion against the palace. A public interview here, a philanthropic announcement there. Each move subtle, calculated, and increasingly at odds with William's vision of what royalty should represent. William's reaction? Calculated vigilance. He started documenting interactions, noting deviations from expected protocols, and quietly consulting with senior members of the royal family. Some might see this as overreach, others as the only responsible action for an heir preparing to inherit a centuries-old institution. But the tension between fraternal loyalty and royal duty, between personal affection and institutional responsibility, was reaching a boiling point. The emotional stakes cannot be overstated. For William, Harry is more than a brother. He is the living embodiment of family, shared history, and the legacy of Diana. Every decision he contemplated weighed on a deeply personal scale. Removing Harry and Meghan's titles was not just a strategic move. It was an emotional earthquake, one that threatened to fracture the family permanently. But sources insist William's resolve hardened when he realized that delay could cost the monarchy more than temporary heartbreak. It could cost its legitimacy. Meanwhile, Harry reportedly felt blindsided. He doesn't understand, a source close to Harry allegedly told reporters, how much he's being forced into a corner. This isn't about titles. It's about control. The brothers' arguments, once private, became magnified by the press. Each public appearance carried subtext, each interview, unintended hints. Fans debated, analysts dissected body language, and every leaked whisper became fodder for speculation. The palace, meanwhile, maintained an air of calm, carefully curated statements masking the storm behind the gilded walls. But let's pause here and consider the audience perspective. Imagine being caught in the middle of a family feud that spans generations, involves millions in public attention, and could alter history. How would you act? Would you prioritize loyalty, transparency, or strategic necessity? William's decision-making, though controversial, was shaped by exactly these high-stakes questions, and understanding his perspective requires a closer look at the events leading directly to the fateful council vote. One pivotal moment reportedly occurred during a private meeting in the East Wing. William, Harry, and senior advisors gathered to discuss what William termed the Sussex trajectory. Insiders described the tension as palpable. Words were measured, but meaning was loaded. A single misstep could, and reportedly did, shift the trajectory irreversibly. Sources claim William presented a stark warning. Either Harry and Meghan align more closely with palace protocols, or he would consider removing their titles. The brothers argued, emotions ran high, and Meghan allegedly interjected with a pointed remark questioning the fairness of the measure. Accounts differ, but the consensus is clear. The stage was set for confrontation. And yet, the story wasn't purely about confrontation. Humor and irony played roles too. One insider recounted William joking, though dryly, that if we let them continue like this, we might as well hand out titles to reality TV stars. The quip, while humorous on the surface, carried layers of tension and warning. It encapsulated the delicate dance of power, family, and public image that defined every decision William would make in the coming weeks. As the weeks passed, the palace corridors buzzed with speculation. Staff were nervous, advisors cautious, and the public increasingly aware that something significant was brewing. Leaks began surfacing, not direct evidence, but subtle hints of impending action. Observers noted changes in scheduling, unusual meeting frequencies, and unexplained trips. Every small movement was analyzed, interpreted, and amplified by the media ecosystem hungry for drama. So, here's the critical question. Was this merely a family disagreement spiraling out of control, or a carefully orchestrated strategy by William to protect the monarchy at all costs? The answer, as we'll uncover, is far more complex than it seems. Emotion, duty, legacy, and loyalty all collided in a volatile mix, leading William to consider an action so extreme that history would remember it as unprecedented: the permanent removal of Harry and Meghan's royal titles. But before we reveal how William took that step, let's pause and examine the human side. Imagine sitting across from your brother, someone you've loved since childhood, someone whose life is intertwined with yours, and knowing that your next words could alter his future forever. Would you hesitate? Would you weigh every possible outcome? William did. He wrestled with doubt, with guilt, and with fear. Fear not of failure, but of the consequences that would ripple through his family, the public, and the monarchy itself. And that brings us to the point where whispers turned into action. What happened next would not only redefine the relationship between two brothers, but also set the stage for the most controversial royal decision of the decade. A decision that would shock fans, divide public opinion, and spark conversations that reverberate around the globe. But the first domino had already fallen, and once it did, there was no turning back. It all started with a letter. Handwritten, carefully worded, and intentionally placed in the right hands at the right moment. According to sources inside the palace, the document wasn't just any correspondence. It was a formal note from William to the royal council, a detailed memorandum outlining the behavior of Harry and Meghan and recommending decisive action, the permanent removal of their royal titles. On the surface, it appeared polite, almost bureaucratic, but every word carried weight. Every line reflected a lifetime of observation, frustration, and strategic calculation. William meticulously documented instances where Harry and Meghan allegedly disregarded royal protocol, engaged in media strategies without consulting the family, and made public statements that directly contradicted the monarchy's values. It was both an indictment and a plea for intervention, a blueprint for action that would become the foundation for one of the most controversial decisions in modern royal history. The letter quickly circulated among senior advisors, sparking heated debates. Some urged caution, warning that removing the Sussex titles permanently would provoke a media frenzy, potentially alienate public support, and deepen a rift within the family that might never heal. Others, however, sided with William, arguing that failing to act would signal weakness and encourage further public defiance from Harry and Meghan. One advisor reportedly remarked, "This isn't just about titles. It's about control, precedent, and the survival of the monarchy in the 21st century." William is right. Hesitation here could cost us everything. But the letter alone wasn't enough. Soon, a second bombshell appeared, a leaked document, obtained and distributed anonymously to select journalists. The contents were explosive. Detailed records of private meetings, media appearances, and even emails suggesting that Harry and Meghan were actively planning projects outside the palace that might conflict with royal obligations. It painted a picture of a couple who, according to the narrative of the document, operated almost as independent sovereigns, seeking influence, attention, and control over their public image while disregarding established protocols. The leak was a calculated move. Some insiders believe William had orchestrated it to gauge public reaction before moving forward. Others insist it was an act of desperation, a way to justify the next step if the council vote leaned against him. Regardless, the effect was immediate. Headlines exploded worldwide. William moves against Harry and Meghan. Palace turmoil. Royal rift deepens. Social media buzzed with speculation, fan theories, and outrage. Every major news outlet dissected the documents, with pundits debating motives, timing, and consequences. And within the palace, tension escalated. Meetings became more frequent, conversations more urgent. Staff and aides reportedly whispered in corridors, carefully avoiding open discussions near phones or cameras. Every decision was scrutinized, every reaction monitored. William, sources say, remained composed outwardly, but privately, he was navigating a minefield of familial emotion, public expectation, and historical responsibility. Amid this chaos, Harry and Meghan reacted, quietly, strategically, but with unmistakable awareness of the storm. Insiders report that Meghan convened her own meetings with advisors, discussing potential media statements and ways to protect their public image. Harry, meanwhile, was described as resolute but frustrated, struggling with the idea that his brother, the man he had trusted for decades, was moving toward a course of action that could permanently sever their royal connection. The emotional undercurrent was raw. Family members, once united by blood and shared history, now operated as factions. The palace, usually a model of discipline and decorum, resembled a chessboard, with each move calculated, anticipated, and countered. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Public perception, royal legacy, and family loyalty were all on the line. Yet, even with these high tensions, there was room for subtle irony. One insider shared a moment from a confidential meeting where William allegedly quipped about the absurdity of modern royal crises. "We used to worry about state dinners and protocol breaches," he reportedly said. "Now it's tweets, interviews, and Netflix specials." The remark, while dryly humorous, underscored the dramatic transformation of the monarchy in the digital age and the challenge William faced in maintaining both tradition and relevance. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. Every private conversation, every leaked document, every subtle gesture was analyzed for signs of weakness or strength. William was acutely aware that timing was critical. A premature move could backfire, while delay could be interpreted as indecision. And the public? They were already forming opinions, reacting emotionally, and amplifying every rumor. The palace was no longer a secluded fortress. It was a stage, with millions of viewers scrutinizing every move. It was within this charged environment that William made the fateful decision to convene the Royal Council. This gathering, which included senior members of the royal family, advisors, and legal counsel, was to be the forum where the future of Harry and Meghan's titles would be decided. Reports suggest that the atmosphere was tense, electric even. The air reportedly crackled with anticipation and apprehension as attendees sensed the magnitude of the choice they were about to make. And the vote, when it occurred, was as dramatic as insiders predicted. William presented his case with meticulous detail, citing instances from the leaked documents, examples of public defiance, and the potential long-term risks to the monarchy. Arguments for leniency were raised, pleas for reconciliation made, but in the end, the weight of William's logic, his authority, and his determination prevailed. The council voted in favor of permanently removing the Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles. It was a moment that insiders describe as both surreal and inevitable. Harry and Meghan were, in essence, stripped of their royal identities. The decision was more than symbolic. It was permanent, a line drawn in the sands of royal history. And while the world would only slowly come to terms with the implications within the palace walls, the ramifications were immediate. For William, it was a decisive victory, but also a deeply personal one. The choice fulfilled a sense of duty, yes, but it came at the cost of familial bonds, trust, and perhaps even love. For Harry and Meghan, it was a devastating blow, a public and private severing of ties that redefined their relationship with the monarchy and the brother who had once been their closest ally. And for the public, the story was far from over. The consequences of this vote, the reactions, the fallout, and the hidden maneuvers behind the scenes would continue to unfold in ways that no one could predict. But even as William left the council chambers, confident in his victory, one question lingered in the air, one that would haunt the next chapters of this story. What would Harry and Meghan do next? When the world learns your darkest decisions, there's no hiding behind palace walls. The moment the vote was confirmed, the palace experienced a peculiar kind of silence, a tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. But that silence didn't last long. Within hours, the news leaked. Headlines screamed across the globe. William strips Harry and Meghan of titles. Royal rift deepens. Social media exploded, with millions reacting in real time, forming camps, speculating motives, and projecting emotions onto a story they barely understood but felt compelled to engage with. Inside the palace, staff scrambled. Security protocols were heightened. Communications were monitored more closely than ever. Aides worked frantically to craft official statements that would appear measured, calm, and dignified. But outside, the storm was uncontrollable. Tabloids, YouTubers, and mainstream outlets dissected every angle, every past interview, every royal appearance, every tweet from the Sussexes. Analysts debated whether this move was a brilliant assertion of authority or a reckless fracture of family unity. Public opinion was divided almost immediately. Some hailed William as the decisive heir, someone willing to protect the monarchy at all costs. Others condemned him for cruelty, for seemingly punishing his brother and sister-in-law without sufficient cause. Polls showed a swing of opinion, with younger audiences leaning towards sympathy for Harry and Meghan, while older, traditional segments lauded William's leadership. The palace, predictably, remained tight-lipped, releasing only a formal statement that acknowledged the council's decision and reaffirmed the monarchy's dedication to duty and service. Yet, the internal fallout was even more dramatic. Sources report that senior advisors, legal counsel, and palace officials began operating in a near-constant state of alert. Every phone call, every email, and even every casual conversation carried stakes. Insiders say William convened several emergency strategy meetings to anticipate potential reactions from Harry, Meghan, and the public. It's like playing chess with the media and your own family simultaneously, one aide reportedly said. Every move has consequences, and sometimes the consequences are unpredictable. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan were not idle. Privately, they were said to be shocked, hurt, and enraged. Meghan reportedly saw the action as a direct attack not only on her and Harry's identities, but on their autonomy and agency as individuals. Sources close to the couple suggest that initial reactions included calls to legal teams, private meetings with advisors, and discussions about media responses. Some speculate that Meghan considered an immediate public statement, but Harry, cautious and strategic, reportedly urged patience, aware that an emotional response could be exploited by the press and the palace alike. The tension between private strategy and public narrative became the defining theme of the next few weeks. Every interview, every subtle public gesture, every Instagram post was analyzed. Analysts noted Meghan's understated fashion choices and body language during appearances, Harry's increasingly formalized speeches and philanthropic engagements, all interpreted as coded messages, signals to both the public and the palace. And then there were the leaks. Insiders allege that both sides, William's camp and the Sussex camp, used selective leaks to manipulate narratives. William's advisors reportedly provided journalists with context emphasizing duty, legacy, and protocol, while Harry and Meghan's team leaked counter-narratives about perceived bullying, unfair treatment, and emotional harm. The media frenzy intensified, creating a climate in which facts, interpretations, and speculation blurred into a single, sprawling narrative consumed by the public. The palace's traditional control over public perception, long considered ironclad, was under siege. Royal communications had relied on discipline, timing, and hierarchy. But in the age of social media, instantaneous reactions, and global scrutiny, the mechanisms of control were being stretched to their limits. Every delay, every carefully worded statement, every ceremonial gesture became material for analysis and judgment. The monarchy was operating in a new reality, one where control was partial, fleeting, and constantly contested. Amid this chaos, William reportedly doubled down on strategy. Meetings with the Privy Council and senior advisors became more frequent, with an emphasis on long-term planning. He was reportedly focused not only on managing immediate public reaction, but on shaping the monarchy's image and ensuring that the removal of Harry and Meghan's titles would reinforce the idea of stability, continuity, and authority. Insiders describe William as meticulous, even obsessive, about documenting every decision, anticipating every possible counter-narrative, and preparing contingencies for potential backlash. But even with all this preparation, emotions ran high behind closed doors. Sources indicate that there were tense private conversations between William and his father, King Charles, who reportedly expressed concern about the public optics and the potential emotional fallout within the family. Charles, while supportive of the decision in principle, allegedly cautioned William about the long-term consequences on familial relationships, particularly with Harry, whom the king loves deeply. Meanwhile, in California, Harry and Meghan reportedly felt increasingly isolated, sensing both the media storm and a palace strategy designed to assert dominance. Sources suggest Meghan's frustration was compounded by the feeling that the narrative was being shaped without their input, while Harry grappled with the realization that reconciliation might no longer be possible without public compromise. Reports even indicate that Meghan privately questioned whether remaining aligned with traditional royal expectations was even feasible given the depth of the rift. the public spectacle became unavoidable. Within days, commentators dissected every aspect of Harry and Meghan's roles, from previous interviews to charitable engagements. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and other platforms exploded with hashtags, memes, and viral commentary. Analysts claimed that this decision, more than any other recent royal development, captured the imagination of a global audience, fueling debate about monarchy, family, privilege, and personal autonomy. Inside the palace, tensions weren't limited to the brothers. Staff, aides, and advisors faced a delicate balancing act. They had to manage information leaks, respond to media inquiries, and navigate the complex web of family dynamics, all while ensuring that their own positions remained secure. Some staff reportedly found themselves caught between loyalty to William and empathy for Harry and Meghan, creating a tense, high-pressure environment where minor mistakes could have amplified consequences. And yet, amidst the chaos, there were moments of irony, humor, and human emotion. One palace aide allegedly joked about the absurdity of a monarchy being destabilized by Instagram posts and Netflix specials, highlighting the collision between centuries-old tradition and modern media culture. The jest, however, masked the very real emotional and strategic stakes at play, a reminder that even in the most formal institutions, human reactions remain unpredictable. As the days turned into weeks, the fallout only intensified. Leaks, speculation, and emotional commentary created a near-constant pressure cooker atmosphere. William remained resolute but reportedly emotionally strained, aware that his decision, while strategically sound in his view, would leave lasting scars. Harry and Meghan, equally determined, began planning their next moves, realizing that their public narrative, and possibly their legacy, depended on controlling their own story. And so, the stage was set for the next chapter, a showdown not only of titles but of public opinion, media strategy, and familial loyalty. Every tweet, every interview, and every public appearance would now be interpreted as a move in an ongoing battle that blurred the lines between personal emotion and institutional responsibility. But while the world focused on headlines, behind the palace walls, a series of private conversations and secret meetings were quietly reshaping the next phase of this unprecedented royal conflict. Conversations that no one outside those walls would be prepared for. When you've been cornered, sometimes the only way out is to fight back louder than the storm around you. Almost immediately after the council vote, Harry and Meghan began mobilizing what insiders describe as a coordinated counterattack. Quiet, calculated, and increasingly aggressive. Their strategy was multi-pronged: protect their public image, challenge the palace legally if necessary, and reclaim narrative control in a media landscape that had already framed them as the aggressors, the rebels, and, in some narratives, the victims. First, the legal angle. Sources close to the couple indicate that within 48 hours of the vote, Harry's legal team had drafted notices addressing the decision to strip their titles. The letters were meticulous, citing historical precedents, ambiguities in royal protocols, and potential overreach by the royal council. Meghan's team simultaneously explored the limits of British and international law, questioning whether the monarchy could unilaterally revoke their titles without consultation. Their lawyers argued that while titles were symbolic, their removal impacted personal identity, charitable partnerships, and the couple's business engagements. One insider revealed, they understood the symbolic power of titles. Titles aren't just labels, they're currency, social, political, even financial. Losing them without a fight wasn't an option. While legal measures were being drafted, Harry and Meghan's media strategy was equally calculated. Private sources suggest that Meghan, in particular, spearheaded this effort. Meetings with advisors, former press aides, and independent media consultants were conducted to craft public messaging that would be sympathetic, emotionally compelling, and strategically effective. The goal was clear: pivot the narrative from alleged defiance to injustice, from scandal to victimhood, and to cast William's move as a personal vendetta rather than a procedural necessity. A leaked document, allegedly from one of Meghan's advisors, detailed a plan to leverage selective interviews, social media platforms, and carefully timed public appearances. Their approach wasn't about overtly attacking William or the monarchy. It was about subtle, persistent framing. Every photo, every quote, Every social media post was designed to convey resilience, dignity, and moral high ground. Emotional beats were emphasized: family separation, public scrutiny, and personal hardship, to elicit empathy from global audiences. Yet, despite their strategic precision, the couple faced challenges. Insiders note that internal disagreements occasionally flared. Harry reportedly favored a more direct approach, statements and interviews that addressed the decision head-on, while Meghan preferred indirect messaging, careful framing, and emotional resonance. Sources suggest that these tensions were temporary but highlighted the pressure of managing both a personal response and a public campaign under unprecedented scrutiny. The public began to notice. Within days, media outlets reported on the couple's plans to engage with journalists, craft targeted social media content, and possibly launch independent projects highlighting their perspectives. Analysts suggested that this was more than media engagement. It was a battle for control over public perception, reputation, and influence. Every interview would now be examined for nuance, every comment dissected for potential contradictions. Meanwhile, the palace remained on high alert. William reportedly increased monitoring of the couple's activities, with aides analyzing every public appearance, tweet, and press statement. Some insiders speculated that this level of surveillance was unprecedented in recent royal history, underscoring the magnitude of the perceived threat. Every potential leak, every hint of counter-narrative, was treated as a strategic concern, and the palace reportedly began formulating contingency plans to respond if the public perception began to tilt in favor of Harry and Meghan. But the counterattack wasn't limited to media and legal maneuvers. The couple also reached out to select allies within the entertainment, philanthropic, and political spheres. Contacts with former colleagues, charity boards, and media personalities were leveraged to amplify their message subtly. Sources claim that strategic partnerships were developed to frame the narrative in sympathetic or neutral terms, ensuring that their side of the story would not be drowned out by palace communications. The emotional toll was palpable. Private aides described Meghan as unrelenting, emotionally intense, and fiercely protective of Harry, while Harry was portrayed as resolute but visibly stressed, balancing anger, strategy, and family loyalty. These emotional spikes were reportedly managed carefully in public appearances, but behind closed doors, tensions ran high. There were moments of frustration, late-night strategizing, and even heated discussions over the risks of going public versus remaining silent. Simultaneously, whispers began to circulate about potential new projects. Sources suggested the couple considered documentaries, podcasts, or memoirs as platforms to present their narrative. While nothing was publicly confirmed at this stage, insiders claimed the mere speculation created anxiety within the palace. The fear wasn't just about reputational damage. It was about controlling a story before it could be fully told by those inside the monarchy. Yet, even with all this preparation, unexpected leaks complicated the plan. Journalists with anonymous palace sources began publishing speculative pieces, suggesting internal palace tensions, possible reconciliatory offers, and even familial ultimatums. Each article was dissected, analyzed, and countered. Harry and Meghan's team responded selectively, providing clarifications or allowing narratives to develop organically when advantageous. It was a chess game, played on multiple boards, with the global audience as both spectator and participant. Irony, too, played a role. The very platforms meant to empower the Sussexes, social media, global media contacts, and online visibility, also magnified scrutiny and criticism. Every carefully crafted message risked misinterpretation. Every public gesture risked backlash. And yet, this duality became a core part of their strategy. The tension between visibility and vulnerability, control and exposure, personal identity and public persona. As days turned into weeks, the impact became clear. Harry and Meghan's counterattack wasn't just reactive, it was reshaping the story entirely. Global audiences began discussing not only the revocation of their titles, but the ethical, emotional, and cultural implications. Conversations about monarchy, privilege, family loyalty, and personal autonomy flooded the public sphere, often sparked by subtle cues, strategic statements, or leaks orchestrated by the Sussexes. And within the palace, the pressure intensified. William and his advisors were forced to consider how to respond, whether publicly or privately. Every action now carried consequences not only for the immediate family, but for the monarchy's legacy. The balance between authority and perception, duty and emotion, strategy and humanity had never been more fragile. But as the Sussexes quietly prepared their next move, one insider revealed a shocking possibility, one that could upend the entire royal power structure, challenge the decisions of the council, and leave William scrambling in ways he hadn't anticipated. By the time the media frenzy reached its fever pitch, it wasn't just headlines and hashtags dominating conversations. It was the leaks. And in the royal sphere, leaks are more than gossip. They are weapons. Over centuries, the palace had relied on discipline, loyalty, and discretion to safeguard its image. But now, that fragile system was cracking. The first leak came subtly, a report from an anonymous palace insider suggesting that William's decision was motivated not purely by duty, but by long-standing sibling rivalry. Though unverified, it spread like wildfire, creating a narrative that the heir to the throne had acted out of personal spite rather than constitutional obligation. Analysts dissected phrasing, timing, and previous public statements. Social media users debated every word, wondering, was William truly the protector of the monarchy, or was this a family feud turned institutional? Inside, however, the discussions were intense. Advisors debated whether further leaks were sabotage, inadvertent, or part of a calculated strategy by Harry and Meghan. Each scenario carried different risks and required different responses. Some advocated aggressive measures to identify the sources. Others cautioned restraint, warning that overreaction could exacerbate public perception issues. The psychological toll was equally severe. Royal staff reported sleepless nights, heightened stress, and an ongoing sense of unpredictability. Trust, a foundational pillar of the monarchy, was eroding in real time. Every conversation, every email, every gesture was now scrutinized not just for operational effectiveness, but for potential media impact. And yet, amid the turmoil, one fact became increasingly clear. The palace was no longer operating solely within its traditional boundaries. The global media ecosystem, combined with a highly strategic counterattack by Harry and Meghan, had created a landscape where every decision, no matter how carefully considered, could be interpreted, reframed, and weaponized. The very institution that had for centuries defined narrative and perception now found itself reacting to forces both internal and external, human and digital. But while the palace struggled to contain leaks, navigate betrayal, and maintain authority, an even more shocking revelation was about to emerge, one that would shake the foundations of trust, expose the depth of internal fractures, and redefine the stakes of the entire royal conflict. Sometimes, the only way to prevent a family from falling apart is to confront the storm directly, even if it means exposing what everyone hoped would stay hidden. As the weeks of public speculation, leaks, and media chaos intensified, it became increasingly clear that the royal council alone could not manage the situation. While William had exercised authority with precision in stripping Harry and Meghan of their titles, the repercussions had begun to spiral beyond control. Public debates about family loyalty, monarchy relevance, and emotional betrayal dominated newspapers, online forums, and television broadcasts worldwide. The monarchy faced a crisis not merely of authority, but of perception, and all eyes turned, silently, decisively, toward the Queen. Sources close to Buckingham Palace report that the Queen had been monitoring every development with a combination of concern and determination. Unlike William, whose approach relied heavily on procedure, legal justification, and public messaging, the Queen's intervention was expected to focus on mediation, reconciliation, and stabilizing the family's private dynamics. She recognized that while titles and protocol could be revoked or reinforced, family relationships could not be managed purely through decree. What made her intervention unprecedented was its secrecy. According to insiders, she orchestrated a private summit, a gathering of the most influential members of the royal family, including William, Charles, and selected senior advisors. The meeting was held discreetly, away from prying eyes and media speculation, in a wing of Buckingham Palace reserved for sensitive discussions. Even the household staff who were not directly involved were kept unaware, highlighting the gravity and confidentiality of the intervention. The Queen reportedly began the meeting by acknowledging the tension. "We must address what is happening before it consumes us," she said, emphasizing not only the public consequences, but the emotional and moral stakes. Her tone, described as firm yet measured, conveyed authority, but also a maternal concern for unity and the legacy of the monarchy. The discussion quickly became charged. William reportedly defended his actions, citing the necessity of preserving the integrity of the monarchy. He argued that Harry and Meghan's behavior, coupled with ongoing media exposure and strategic counterattacks, had forced his hand. "This is about duty," he insisted, "not personal animosity." But the Queen, drawing on decades of experience balancing protocol with human sensitivity, questioned whether the approach risked long-term familial fractures that no title revocation could mend. And, known for her directness, reportedly pressed on the emotional dimensions. She highlighted that Harry, as a brother and son, was navigating profound public and private pressures, and Meghan, regardless of the controversies surrounding her, had become an inseparable part of the family narrative. She argued that while discipline and accountability were essential, empathy and strategic reconciliation could prevent deeper damage, both within the family and to the monarchy's public image. The Queen also addressed Charles, whose role as monarch-in-waiting made him a critical stakeholder. While Charles supported the authority exercised in the council vote, he reportedly recognized that public perception and internal trust were deteriorating rapidly. The Queen encouraged him to consider the emotional ramifications for William as well, acknowledging that the burdens of authority often carried unseen personal costs. But as the discussion deepened, the Queen introduced a revelation that stunned attendees. She had knowledge of communications between Harry and Meghan and external advisors, communications that suggested potential further public disclosures, private interviews, and even media projects designed to challenge the monarchy's narrative. She emphasized that these plans, if realized, could escalate the crisis beyond manageable levels, potentially undermining not only William's authority but the monarchy's stability. This revelation forced the room into a new dynamic. Advisors reportedly debated whether to intercept these communications, preemptively negotiate with Harry and Meghan, or attempt direct reconciliation. Options were weighed not merely for legal or procedural effectiveness, but for emotional impact. How would Harry react if he learned that family members were monitoring his private communications? Could Meghan be convinced to shift strategies, or had the media campaign reached a point of irreversible momentum? One insider revealed that at this point, the Queen proposed a bold, unprecedented measure, a private family dialogue, mediated by neutral parties, designed to bridge personal grievances and institutional concerns. This was not a typical royal protocol. It involved direct confrontation, emotional transparency, and candid acknowledgement of personal and public actions, a strategy rarely employed in the public-facing, historically restrained royal environment. Preparations for the dialogue were meticulous. Security and confidentiality measures were intensified, meeting points were rotated to prevent leaks, and timing was synchronized with global media cycles to minimize speculation. Participants were briefed not only on procedural elements, but on psychological and emotional tactics, active listening, strategic pauses, and the management of visible emotional responses. This was as much about human dynamics as legal or procedural maneuvering. Sources report that the Queen's intervention also included private messages to Harry and Meghan. These messages were said to be carefully worded, emphasizing family loyalty, shared history, and the potential damage to public perception. Importantly, they framed the dialogue as a choice, an opportunity to participate voluntarily, not a forced meeting, offering a semblance of agency while conveying the seriousness of the matter. As the day of the meeting approached, tension was palpable. The palace staff described a surreal quietness in Buckingham Palace, a sense of anticipation mixed with apprehension. Security was tight, press speculation rampant, and the atmosphere thick with unspoken stakes. Observers outside the palace speculated on possible outcomes. Would Harry and Meghan attend? Would they leverage the dialogue for media advantage? Or would the Queen face a standoff that could fracture both family and institution irreparably? And then, Just hours before the scheduled dialogue, an unexpected leak appeared, one that suggested Harry and Meghan had preemptively discussed public statements and possible interviews with international media. While details were scant, the implication was clear. The couple had not only anticipated the Queen's intervention, but were actively preparing a counter-narrative that could undermine it. This revelation forced a critical pivot within the palace. Advisors debated whether to proceed, delay, or modify the dialogue structure to accommodate potential challenges. Every decision carried risk. Every scenario weighed heavily on emotional and strategic outcomes. The Queen, however, remained resolute. Sources suggest she viewed the upcoming dialogue as pivotal, an opportunity to stabilize relationships, assert authority, and potentially steer the monarchy away from a spiral of public conflict and private estrangement. Yet, just as preparations were finalized, a further shock emerged. An insider revealed that one of the attendees, a trusted advisor, may have been feeding selective information to Harry and Meghan, complicating efforts to ensure confidentiality. This new element added a layer of urgency and distrust, highlighting that even the Queen's intervention was operating in a landscape riddled with uncertainty and potential betrayal. The family meeting was about to begin. Every participant understood the stakes. Reputations, relationships, and the monarchy itself could be irreversibly altered in a single, tension-filled session. And yet, none could predict the revelation that Harry would drop within the first 5 minutes. One that would silence the room and force the Queen, William, and every advisor present to rethink everything they thought they knew about loyalty, betrayal, and the cost of power. In the midst of a carefully orchestrated reconciliation, the unexpected has the power to rewrite history in an instant. The room was heavy with tension. Buckingham Palace, usually a symbol of centuries-old tradition, felt more like a stage set for a high-stakes drama. Every chair, every polished surface, every subtle glance carried unspoken weight. The Queen sat at the head of the room, her composure a mask of centuries of experience, while William and Charles flanked her, their expressions tight with anticipation. Princess Anne maintained her usual posture, exuding poise, though insiders claim she was equally tense, aware that the conversation could spiral in seconds. Harry entered with Meghan, his presence calm, yet deliberate. Meghan's gaze was steady, yet subtle signs betrayed the intensity of her focus, slight tightening of the jaw, a controlled breath before speaking. Rumors of their preparation had already sent ripples through media outlets, fueling speculation about the potential bombshell they might deliver. But no one in the room could predict the magnitude of what was about to unfold. The Queen opened the discussion with measured words. "We are here because family, duty, and public trust intersect. We must speak honestly and with respect. What is shared here stays within these walls, but it must be true." Her tone was both an invitation and a warning. The room's silence emphasized the stakes, each second thickening the tension. Then, Harry leaned forward. The words that followed were deliberate, heavy, and calculated. "There's something you all need to understand. Some things you've been told, some narratives you believe, are not entirely accurate." The statement, deceptively simple, caused a ripple. Advisors exchanged subtle glances. Charles's hands tightened on the table, William's jaw stiffened. The air seemed to grow colder. Even Meghan's usually composed expression carried a shadow of gravity, signaling that Harry's revelation was premeditated and potentially explosive. Harry paused for effect, then continued, his voice steady but imbued with quiet emotion. "The decision to strip us of our titles, the media campaigns that followed, the leaks, you believe it's about protocol, behavior, or public image. But the truth is far more complex. And it involves choices that have been made over decades, choices that affect not just us, but the future of the monarchy itself." At this point, the Queen reportedly raised her hand, a subtle gesture to maintain control, but Harry's gaze met hers, unflinching. The room had become a battlefield of words, poised between diplomacy and confrontation. He continued, "I have information, confirmed documentation and communication logs, that reveal decisions were made with the intent to marginalize me from the family, to control narratives, and to manipulate public perception. This isn't speculation. These are facts." The weight of Harry's words sent shockwaves. Charles reportedly paled, a rare reaction that insiders interpreted as both surprise and internal conflict. William's composure flickered for the briefest moment, an acknowledgement that despite his strategic planning, he had underestimated the depth of Harry's preparedness. And, ever observant, maintained her external poise but internally recalculated how this revelation could shift dynamics within the family. Then, Meghan added her voice, calm yet piercing. And it's not just about us. These strategies, these manipulations, impact every narrative about the monarchy. Every appearance, every media engagement, every official statement has been orchestrated in ways that misrepresent reality. The room seemed to tighten further. Advisors reportedly began to shift uneasily, aware that history, public perception, and their careers could be affected by every second of this dialogue. The Queen remained outwardly composed, but sources indicate her mind raced, weighing the implications of the information, considering how it could alter internal trust, legal precedents, and the monarchy's reputation. Harry's revelation continued, and the shock escalated. There are communications between senior advisors and media outlets, documents that show attempts to undermine public sympathy for us, to paint us as ungrateful, unfit, or reckless, all strategically timed with public appearances, royal announcements, and even philanthropic engagements. These aren't coincidences. As he spoke, William reportedly leaned back, a fleeting mix of disbelief and concern flickering across his face. Staff members present reportedly felt the gravity immediately. Decades of public image management, carefully maintained narratives, and internal loyalty structures were now being directly challenged in a single, charged meeting. And then came the most explosive part. I have evidence that not only were we misrepresented, but the decisions that led to stripping our titles were influenced by selective information, carefully curated leaks, and internal recommendations designed to sway judgment. In essence, our fate was partially dictated by a controlled narrative, not pure assessment of actions. The Queen paused, reportedly exchanging a subtle glance with Charles, a silent acknowledgement of the complexity and severity of Harry's claim. William's reaction was described by insiders as a mixture of shock and strategic recalculation. An understanding that the battle had shifted from procedure to public narrative, from private authority to perception control. Meghan added, quietly but firmly. And yet, despite these manipulations, our goal remains unity and truth. We came here not to attack, but to clarify reality. The decisions made, the titles revoked, the public narratives, it all needs to be transparent if the monarchy is to survive credibility crises in the future. At that point, advisors reportedly scrambled to process the magnitude. Legal implications, public relations strategies, and internal family dynamics collided. Sources suggest that some aides were on the verge of panic, realizing that the carefully planned narrative surrounding the revocation of titles could now be reframed by Harry and Meghan, potentially destabilizing years of strategic planning. The Queen, however, maintained remarkable control. She reportedly responded not with anger, but measured pragmatism. Thank you for your honesty. We will consider these facts. But understand this. The monarchy is more than any one person or any single narrative. Decisions made are intended to preserve the institution and our legacy. That will remain our priority. Even so, the revelation had done its work. It had reframed the discussion entirely. William's previously absolute authority in the council vote now faced scrutiny, internal and external. Charles had to reconcile the duality of his son's perspective with his duty to maintain public confidence. And observed, calculating how to balance family loyalty with institutional responsibility. And for the advisors, the rules had changed. Their strategic planning now needed to accommodate counter-narratives and potential global scrutiny. Harry and Meghan reportedly concluded with a pointed message. We want transparency, accountability, and the opportunity to ensure that the truth is represented accurately. Anything less risks further public mistrust and, ultimately, the credibility of the monarchy itself. The room fell into silence, each person absorbing the weight of what had been said. Even the most seasoned advisors reportedly admitted internally that they had never encountered a family intervention escalate so dramatically, so publicly, and with such potential ramifications. And then came the cliffhanger moment. the one that would reverberate far beyond Buckingham Palace. A confidential document, slipped quietly onto the table by Harry, was allegedly titled Royal Council Communications, the manipulation of titles and narratives. Insiders report that everyone in the room understood immediately. The contents could expose internal strategies, media collaborations, and potentially decades of controlled information. In other words, what had been a private family reconciliation had just become a document with explosive potential. One that could redefine public understanding of the monarchy forever. The Queen, William, Charles, and now faced a choice that would determine not just the next steps in their family drama, but the future of the monarchy itself. And what they decided in that moment would shock the world. The moment Harry placed the folder labeled Royal Council Communications, the manipulation of titles and narratives, on the table, Buckingham Palace shifted from a room of calculated diplomacy to a high-stakes war room of psychological tension. Every eye locked onto the document. Whispers of shock, disbelief, and immediate strategizing filled the air, a subtle but undeniable hum of adrenaline undercutting the royal calm. For centuries, the palace had maintained an aura of control, a meticulously crafted image of order and hierarchy. But now, in those few seconds, that illusion teetered dangerously. William's expression was a mix of disbelief and icy calculation. He had anticipated opposition, media scrutiny, and familial tension, but Harry's